Hey guys, good morning. My name's Gerald, and I'm so glad that you guys are here. We start a new series today called Best Question Ever, and man, I'm excited about this series. It's going to be a lot of fun for the next 4 weeks as we dig into this idea of the best question ever, of asking and answering the best question ever. Before we do that, I want to remind you or tell you if it's the first time you've been here in a while, or maybe it's your first time here, in about 6 weeks, we are moving as a church to Huff High School. It's going to be an incredible environment for us. We love Katy Fit, and it's been a great home for us for the past 3 years. But we're moving to Huff, and we're going to we're going to combine our worship experiences together, and so we won't have a 9 or an 11 anymore, at least for a while. We'll have a 10 o'clock all together, so you get to see people that come to the 9 that you never get to see. But also, we just feel like it's an amazing facility for us to launch into the community in some different ways. And so there's a lot of ways to help with that. There's a card nearby you probably that lists some of those ways. And this is an all hands on deck experience. So if you're looking for a way to get plugged in, maybe even for the first time, this is a great opportunity to take a step into the life of the church. I think what happens sometimes is when you start coming to church for a while, it might be that you're just returning, or maybe this is your first experience with church, and we want to say, gosh, just keep coming back. Like keep being here. We want to be a place where you can belong while you're figuring some things out. But we also want to say, hey, when you're ready, it's time maybe for some of us to take a step into the life of the church, into serving and into crews, and those things are all available for you there. So I just want to make sure you hear that, and we're going to be saying that like every single week. We've got a lot in front of us as a church. And so, okay, here we go. Best question ever. This is the beginning of the new series. A couple years ago, bought a car. Now, that's not unusual, but the unusual thing that I did was I bought it through Craigslist without ever seeing the car. And, I saw pictures of the car, but let me just explain. I was looking for a Toyota Land Cruiser that was like an 80s model Toyota Land Cruiser, so I was scouring the internet, and you would see them pop up on Craigslist, and then they would get bought. And so one came up. It was from Eastern North Carolina, and I saw it pop up on a Saturday afternoon on Craigslist, and I immediately called the guy. And on the phone, while I was talking to him, I told him I wanted to buy it, and I sent him some money. And I arranged to drive. I got a one-way rental car. I drove and met him in the middle of Eastern North Carolina. It was this 89, I believe, Toyota Land Cruiser. And most of the pictures showed the vehicle being white. And when I got there, I realized that the majority of the vehicle was actually rust. It wasn't white at all. Like, there was white, but there was a ton of rust. This guy had come from the Outer Banks, which is where the car lived, which was a big mistake on my part, because there's a lot of rust going on. And so I met him there, and I just had that feeling when I saw the car that my stomach just hit the floor. And I just had that sinking feeling that maybe you've had too when you've made like a bad decision. And so because of my basically pride and ego, I went ahead and went through with the purchase. Like, I didn't walk away, I didn't drive away, I went through with it and paid a little bit of that price. What if there was one question that you could ask in your life that made all the other questions make sense? Like, what if there was one question that you could ask that would help you answer the right way to just about everything or anything in your life? Our hope and prayer, my hope and prayer during this series is that this question that we talk about, this question that we lay out, will become the centerpiece of your life. Think about this with me. That was one of my regrets that I just shared. Think about the greatest regret, though. The greatest regret of your life, possibly. Like, when did it happen? What is the greatest regret of your life? Maybe it was a college weekend that you wish you had back. Maybe it was a relationship that you had that you just wish never happened. Maybe this one particular night something happened and you wish that you could have avoided that. Maybe it was spring break and you think back to spring break and you're like, man, did I really mess that up? There are definitely decisions that I've made in high school and in college and in my adult life that I wish I could do over. And if I had asked this question, I really believe that this question would have helped me avoid my greatest regret. So, we're going to take a look at this one particular passage from the Bible. And here's what I want to say to you guys, especially if you have some Bible sort of skepticism in your life. The guy that wrote this passage, this book, in fact, the book of Ephesians, was a guy named Paul. He wrote more than half of the New Testament. Now, what we know about Paul is that he's a historical figure. Like, he actually existed, and we all kind of know, that's just a known fact in history, that he existed. He actually persecuted Christians. You might know some of his story. He persecuted Christians. He wanted to get rid of Christianity. He was a Jewish leader who thought that this was a Jewish cult that had happened, that had sprung up around this guy Jesus, and he thought that his main mission in life should be to get rid of this cult. But what we also know about Paul is that on a single day, not a process, didn't take years, didn't take weeks, didn't take days, on one single day, Paul went from trying to kill Christians to becoming one. Just like that. He made the decision on a single day to try to instead of trying to kill Christians, I'm going to become one. And so out of that, he began to do a lot of work. He began to do a lot of things. He in fact wrote a bunch of letters to different churches. And one of the letters he wrote was to the churches around Ephesus, this town called Ephesus. He wrote this letter, and what he was trying to do was tell Christians how to live. He's like, hey, you were living in darkness. You were once living in darkness, but now you're living in light. Now you're living as a child of the light because of Jesus, and so you can't continue to live how you were. You can't continue to deceive people. You can't continue to mistreat people. Now you have to treat people the way that God has treated you through Jesus. And so he began to talk. He writes about deceit. He writes about immorality, and he writes about how people were talking to one another and how they need to talk to each other differently because of Jesus. He writes about all these practical things. But it's also really hard, because it's hard to start to ask people to embrace a different lifestyle when they've come out of a culture that's not conducive at all to any of this, much like ours. It's not conducive to honesty. It's not conducive to forgiveness or to morality or any of these things that he was talking about. And so, Paul does a really smart thing. He offers this baby step. He says, hey, I'm going to give you something, and we're going to word it as a question, that if you begin to ask this question, you can use it as a grid over your whole life, and it's going to give you a head start as one who wants to try to live in the kingdom of light instead of the kingdom of darkness, okay? So we're going to take a look at this one passage from the book of Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 15, 16, 17. It's going to be something that we lay over this entire series together, and here's what he said. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. That's it. That's the verse. He says, be very careful. In other words, look around you. Look around. Open up your eyes. Don't be careless. Be careful with what you're doing. He says with how you live specifically. Be careful with how you live your life. Be careful with how you live your life. And then he says these words, not as unwise. And the word unwise is this word that really means careless. Not as a careless person, not as an unwise person, but as a wise person, as a careful person. So be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. And then he says, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. In other words, like you and I live in a time and place where if you pick your feet up when you're in the current of life and you let the current take you, it will take you to a place where you don't want to be. And in fact, if you just kind of live picking your feet up and going with the flow and not really thinking about it, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be when it comes to relationships, when it comes to your money, your finances, when it comes to your kids, when it comes to your husband, when it comes to your wife, your job. The current will just take you where it wants you to go. So he's saying, don't be careless. Otherwise, this flow of life is just going to take you off somewhere else. And then he says these words, so don't be foolish. Don't be foolish, he says, but understand what the Lord's will is. We are people who like loopholes. We look for loopholes in things like this, don't we? We look for ways around the things that we know are right. But he says, don't be foolish. In other words, don't be careless, but, and this is like a big but, he says, but understand. And this word understand is this idea of I want you to own up to this. I want you to face up to this. I want you to tell yourself the truth. He says, but understand this. In other words, you know what he's saying. You know what you should do. You know the right thing to do. You know the difference between right and wrong. So quit playing around. Quit talking yourself into things, or quit talking yourself out of things that you should be into. And he says, understand. I want you to understand. I want you to face up to it. I want you to face it. I want you to face up to what you know God's will is for you. Don't talk yourself out of things that you need to be in. Don't talk yourself into things that you need to be out of. He's saying, pause, face God's will, and then do it. Do it. And the thrust of this is this idea that I want you to be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. And so the question, and it's kind of the litmus test, it's not, hey, let me figure out what everybody else is doing. That is not the litmus test. That's not the question we need to be asking. Well, what's everybody else doing? That's what I want to do. The question also is not, what's legal? Well, what's legal, right? Like, I can do it if it's legal. That is not the bar that he is setting. It's a little higher than that. The question is this: what is the wise thing for me to do? What's the wise thing for me to do? So I want to talk to you about that this morning in 3 different ways, because here's the key. The easiest person for you to deceive, is yourself. The easiest person for you to deceive is you. And you know how this works. You know how this works in your past. You don't just make an unwise choice, a wrong decision. Usually what happens is you take little baby steps of slight, unwise decision here, an unwise decision there, and that leads to a place where you make a wrong decision, but you didn't really start out to try to make a wrong decision. You just kind of got there through a series of unwise decisions. The question is, what is the wise thing for me to do? In the first place I want to talk about that is this: what is the wise thing for me to do as it relates to my past? What's the wise thing for me to do in light of my past experiences? In light of my past experiences, what is the wise thing for me to do? So here's the deal. Your past is your past. My past is my past. Like what's okay for you may not be okay for me because of my past experiences. What's okay for me may not be okay for you because of your past experiences. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what happened the last time that you went there, or the last time that you called him back when he called you, or that time that you spent the night there, or the time you snuck out, or the time you went to that thing, or the time you didn't go when you should have gone, or that time you bought that thing. What happened then? Your past experience. In light of that, what is the wise thing to do? Now, you know why sometimes we begin to feel in life like your history repeats itself, like you just get stuck, your history repeat yourself over and over again? It's because you don't ask this question. The problem is this: we think we can manage outcomes. Like, we believe that we can manage outcomes, that we can control the situation so we can do what we want to do, and I can control the end result. But the truth is, none of us can control the end result. We just think we can. We convince ourselves that we can manage the outcomes. But how do you instead apply this question in light of your past experiences? Not what's right, or not even what's right, but or legal. No, it's a higher bar than that. What is the wise thing for you to do? Not for everyone else around you, for you. What is the wise thing for you to do? Now, you hate that, don't you? Like, you kind of hate it? I kind of hate it. because it brings total clarity. And that can be uncomfortable because often when I ask that question, I know the answer. Like I know, my gut tells me I know the answer. But if you want history to stop repeating itself in your life, you have to ask and then act on the answer to that question. In light of my past experience, what is the wise thing for me to do? Let's talk about it in another way with relation to your present. Your present, the here and now, right? In light of my current circumstances, what is the wise thing for me to do? It could go something like this. Like I used to go out with those guys. I used to do this. I used to do that in my life. But now my situation has changed and I can't really do that anymore. If you're a student, it might be, hey, you used to you have exams. Like you used to not have exams, and now you have exams, and so everyone else is doing something that you want to do, and you've got to make a choice. I've got exams, this week or tomorrow or whatever, and they're all doing that, and I used to do that. I did that last year. Now I can't do that anymore. Or, hey, everybody's going on this trip. I used to go on this trip, but now my life has changed. My life circumstances have changed, and I might not. Maybe I shouldn't go on that trip now when I went last year. In light of current circumstances, what is the wise thing to do? When we started having kids, like babies in the house, things changed. I mean, things really changed. I used to play golf, like a lot of golf, and then a baby comes along and you're like, priorities shift around, don't they? My golf clubs got to the corner of the garage really fast. And I really wasn't mad about that. I was okay with that. But you can't just walk off and say, I'm going to play a 4.5-hour round of golf. I'll see you later. When there's a baby crying in the house and you're walking out of the house. I mean, things change. Current circumstances change. You might have like a new job, and that might change some things for you. You might have a new baby, and that changes things for you. Maybe you just recently moved, and things are just different right now. What are your current circumstances? So when you ask that, doesn't that bring like an uncomfortable clarity to things? Doesn't it bring this uncomfortable clarity? And you want to say to yourself, but I've done that before. Like I used to do this. I did this last year. Why can't I do this again? But your circumstances have changed. And a better question is, in light of my current circumstances, what's the wise thing? And not is it okay, not is it legal, not is it, can I justify it? In light of my current circumstances, what's the wise thing to do? There's a third area too. Your future. Your future, right? In light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, we've all done things in our lives to at different times throw away future hopes and dreams, but it is a tragedy. Listen. It is a tragedy when you trade what I want in the future for what I have right now. When you know that what you have right now is not going to be what you have in the future. It is a tragedy to trade, to make that trade. That happens in relationships all the time. That happens in finances all the time. It is always a bad idea to trade what I want in the future for what I think I need to have right now. This is why so many of us get into debt. And a lot of the time we stay in bad relationships. This alone can change the trajectory of your life. Like some of us have done this in the past, or maybe you're doing it right now. Like you hang with people who don't have future hopes and dreams. They're just sort of thinking about when they're going to get paid next and what the next concert we're going to go to is and what's the next trip we're going to take. But my guess is with you that you have some future desires. You have some future hopes and dreams. And the worst thing that you can do is let people around you rob you of your future because they don't have a vision for theirs. Are you with me? You don't want to let someone else around you rob you of your future because they don't have a vision for theirs, and you pick your feet up and you go with the flow of where they are going. Why would you trade your future for something or someone who's not going to be with you in your future, but that you think you have to have right now? So it's not what we did last time or what we did last summer. It's what's the wise thing for you. You want to be, like if you want to be secure financially in your future, what does that determine? It determines what you do today. What you do today really matters if you want to be secure financially in the future. You want to make an impact on people's lives in the future? What you do today matters. You can't just say, well, I'll do that sometime in the future and it'll just happen. No, you start today. You start serving people today, and it might not be the role that you want. It might not be the thing that you want. It might not be the place that you want to be. But if you're going to hold out, you're never going to get to where you want to go. Now, don't you wish you'd been asking this question your whole life? I feel like I think about places in my life, I'm like, I wish I'd been asking this question with a little more intention in my life and acting out on the answer. But here's the thing, whether you're a Christian or not, and whether you're just exploring, isn't it true that you would be in a better place if you did? Like if you asked and answered that question in your relationships, with your finances, in your job, wouldn't it be true that you would be in a better place if you ask that question? One thing that's true is this: personal vision, like goals in your life, personal vision is often a catalyst for wise decisions. So setting yourself goals for the future is really actually pretty important. When you set those, what you're doing is you're attaching your heart today to a goal that you have in the future. You're attaching your heart to where God wants you in the future. And you're not letting your current circumstance alone control that. You're saying, I have hopes and dreams. I want to make a wise choice now that allows me to accomplish what I think God's calling me to accomplish in the future. In light of my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? Let's put all those together, okay? Put all three of those together. In light of my past experience, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? Do this with me, okay? Will you read this out loud with me? Ready? Read it out loud with me. Let's say it together. On three. 1, 2, 3. In light of my past experience, current circumstances, future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? And when you begin to ask and answer that question, it is a game changer in your life. Nobody plans to screw up their lives. Listen, nobody plans to mess up their lives. It's just that we don't plan not to. No one messes up financially on purpose. It's just that we don't really plan not to. What if you ask with every single decision, what is the wise thing for me to do in my marriage? Not what's the legal thing, what's the okay thing, what can I get away with today? No, what's the wise thing for me to do? In my family, not what's okay, what's allowable. No, what's the wise thing for me to do? As a student, if you're a middle school student, a high school student, this is one of the best questions you can ask in your life. What is the wise thing? Not what everybody else is doing. Not what does it look like for, what's going to not make me stand out or stick out like a sore thumb or whatever, or make me look weird. No, what is the wise thing for me to do? And when you ask that question, you'll know the answer. You'll know. And it will bring sometimes painful clarity. But I promise you, if you begin to ask that question over and over and over again, it's going to lead to less tears in your life. It's going to lead to fewer regrets. It's going to lead to a better relationship with money. And it's going to lead to better relationships with people. Listen, is it a surprise to you? Is it a surprise to you that God, who loves you, wants the best for you? He wants the best for you. And that's why we're called to live not at the level of what we can get by with or what's legal. We're called to live at the level of what is the wise thing to do. So, you have some homework this week, all right? Sorry, students, you have homework. But it's easy, so you can do this, because I'm not even going to ask you to really do anything. I'm just going to ask you to ask the question. Okay? Just ask the question. Don't even do anything different. In fact, do me a favor. Ask the question and then don't do the wise thing. Don't do anything different than you would. Don't break up. Don't get out of that bad loan. Don't change the job or whatever. But you owe it to yourself to know the answer to the question. You owe it to yourself to figure out whether you're going to do anything about it or not. Because here's what we know. When you ask that question, what's the wise thing to do, you will immediately learn something about yourself. You'll immediately learn something about yourself when you ask and answer that question. Teenagers, my teenage friends in here, here's what will happen. When you ask that question, what is the wise thing to do, you know what the answer that will come to you, it'll come to you in your head. You know what it's going to sound like? It's going to sound like everything your parents have been saying already to you. And you don't have to do it. I'm just saying to ask it. You don't have to do it. Just ask, and then ask yourself, what have I learned? What does that say about me? Because you've just learned something about yourself. If you're a boss, if you're an employer and you have employees and you ask the question and the answer comes back to you and it sounds very much like what the team that you are working with has been trying to tell you over and over again, and you've been avoiding that conversation, you've been trying to, to not talk to them about it, what have you learned about yourself? Because you don't want to tell them that they're right. You've learned something about you. Husbands, if you're married, husbands, if you ask yourself this question, don't be surprised when it comes back to you. It sounds an awful lot like what your wife has already been telling you. Wives. Never mind. It only goes so far. If something in you resists the answer, you've discovered something about yourself, and you know what that is? You don't have your best interest in mind. You may not have your best interest in mind, but if you don't, who will? And it's possible that God has your best interest in mind and you don't. It's possible that He has your best interest in mind and you don't. And you've just learned something about yourself. And if that's true, and you ask the question, and you get the answer, and you don't do anything with it, and you continue the path that you're on, and you just ignore that answer, it's possible that one day you're going to wake up in a place that you don't want to be. And you don't want to do that. And I guarantee you this, the people sitting around you and the people that live around you, they don't want that for you either. Don't you owe it to yourself to at least start asking this question? In light of my past experience, which is my past. It's not your past. It's my past. In light of my past experience, okay? In light of my current circumstances, which I got to be aware of what's going on right now that might be different than it was a year ago, a day ago, 10 years ago. In light of my current circumstances. In light of my future goals, my future hopes, my future dreams for me, for my family. In light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Will you pray with me? God, we just believe that you're the giver of all wisdom. And it is so amazing to read in your word that you care that much about us, that you want to help us to be wise. You want us to live lives that flourish. You want us to live lives of impact. You want us to live lives that are really successful as you define success, God. It's not just about what everything my heart desires and that I should receive. No. It's about what you desire for me. And so, God, may we be people who ask that question. And then as we get the answer, may we be bold about stepping into it. Even if it's against the current. Even if it means we put our feet down and turn the opposite way that everyone else seems to be going on. Even if we feel like we're standing alone, would you give us courage this week? So that we make decisions that we don't regret in 5 years or 10 years. So that we make decisions and we're able to tell the stories of our lives proudly and boldly. And then God, this morning as we turn our attention to your table, as we turn our attention to the Lord's Supper, We know that you made choices, you made a decision to come to this world that everyone around you said was foolish. And yet your word says that you use the foolish things to confound the wise, and that you took the darkest day of Jesus on the cross and you turned it into the greatest triumph in the empty tomb. And so as we come to the table with communion, we celebrate, we remember, we reflect, and we thank you for what you've done. And as we take the bread that's broken as the body of Christ and the blood that's symbolized with the cup, we know that we do it remembering you and reflecting on our own relationship with you. We pray this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.